Hey, everybody, and welcome to Bible Study That Doesn't Suck. This is Pastor Megan Rohr at Grace Lutheran in San Francisco, and we are approaching Palm or Passion Sunday. Palm Sunday is when everybody carries in palm leaves, waves them around saying, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Some people might parade around the church, around the entire block. Some people might walk through the sanctuary. Some people might just wave them from their seats. It depends on how able-bodied the congregation is and how into participating they are. And that all kind of varies based on which church you go to. Palm Sunday is a politically motivated time. It might be the last straw that broke the final decision that Jesus needed to die on a cross. It's thought historically that the exact same time that Jesus was entering with palm leaves and fanfare was the exact same time that Pilate was entering on the other side of the temple, and that it would be the equivalent of trying to take away from the grand parade of the political leader. If you think of it kind of like what it would be like if Donald Trump was entering one end of the city, and I don't know, I feel strange about identifying a political leader as Jesus, but I don't know, if you had the equivalent of like Bernie Sanders supporters on the other side making a big fanfare to try to deflate the hoopla and the excitement, it would be a little different because Pilate had the ability to kill people that he was upset with. And if the Romans saw that Pilate did not have control of his people, Pilate kind of was subject to having his own life and his own power taken away. So it was a little bit more than equating it to presidential candidates. If you think of it as maybe like if a dictator who was only working because they were a puppet of someone else, like Assad in Syria, who is kind of being held up by Putin in Russia right now. So if Assad in Syria is having a big party and on the other side of town, all of the opposition people are having their own parade, and that makes Russia wonder, should we keep backing Assad? It would make Assad really nervous and try to take control, sometimes through brutal methods. So that's this Palm Sunday is one of the more fun. It can be fun. If you grew up in the church as a child, you might have fond memories of palm fronds, and waving them can be really fun. One of the things that ancient Christians did is they would put the palm on the front of their door or their entryway or their gate, and it would be like marking your doorway instead of with lamb's blood like they do during Passover, but marking your doorway, saying that your faith is that of a Christian, but doing it in a way that is trying to symbolize peace rather than bloodshed. It's an interesting thing, though, because Palm Sunday, as fun as it might be, as jubilant as it might be, as celebratory as it might be, is paired with Passion Sunday. So if you try to put a palm leaf on your front door as a sign of peace so that you're not really paying attention to the gruesome, bloody, dying stuff, this Sunday doesn't let you get away with that. This Sunday tries to always kind of intimately connect the fun celebration of life and with the wah-wah, fast moving approach that Jesus is going to take to the cross. And so the passion part of the liturgy can be a little downtrodden. This is one of those Sundays where if you're really not into like bloody death readings, if you're not yet ready to read the full Jesus dying on the cross chapter, you might want to call ahead to your congregation and see if they are leaning on the Palm Sunday side, or if they're leaning on the Passion side, or if they're doing a mix of both. Knowing what your psyche has the ability to endure right now can be a good thing for you. And if I don't know if Pastor Dan would agree with this, but I would rather someone calls ahead and finds out if the thing I'm doing on Sunday is going to bug them so they can go somewhere else that week and still like me every week after that, than to come and be mad or disruptive to the service. I've got some hecklers right now. You know who you are if you're watching this Bible study. So this is kind of a choose your own adventure Sunday. You can find a space that's going to lean heavily on the Palm Sunday, yay, peace on earth. You can find a place that's going to lean towards yucky, gross, death on a cross, isn't it horrible and unjust? Or you can find a place that's going to balance somewhere in between. I usually try to stay Palm Sunday-y for about 5 minutes and then go into the Passion side, but not so much that people think that they can skip Monday, Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday, and then Sunday services. And if you don't know what those are, Monday, Thursday is traditionally a foot washing day, but most congregations do hand washing because people don't like their foot touched. And a reminder to be servant leader. So some spaces will have a homeless provider in their area come and speak to them that day. Good Friday is the official day that we celebrate Jesus's death. Yay, how good. He's dead, slunk down. And it's kind of a more solemn service. If you like short services where no one talks to you and there's no passing of the peace, this is your worship service, because it's in, out, dark, get out of the space. Saturday, for congregations that do them, that's another service you might want to call ahead for, because traditionally in the church, the Saturday before Easter is the day when you read the entire history of the planet. And that can take a long time if you get someone who's really geeky and really wants to do every significant event that happened. I went to a service once where my back went out because I was reading for so long with my arms up. So call ahead. Find out if it's a 40-minute service or a 4-hour service. See what you're getting into before you go. Other services, it's the soonest you can possibly celebrate Easter. And for people who are traveling to grandma's house but still want the opportunity to celebrate Easter with their home congregation, it's kind of an easy way for kids to do it without having to wake up early, or to be able to go to brunch rather than to go to the Easter service. And it can be the time when some pastors are able to do a bit more of a creative service, and then they do the traditional service on Sunday. And so, or if you hate trumpets, the Saturday service is for you, because a lot of congregations will have trumpets. And so that's Monday, Thursday, foot or hand washing. Good Friday, Jesus is dead. We remember how great that is. Saturday, either super long, remembering the entire history of the world, which can be cool and geeky. Sometimes it's everything fun in the Bible acted out by members of the congregation in 3 hours. Or Easter early. We're doing Beatles Mass, so come on by to Grace if you want, or you can watch it live stream. And then Sunday morning typically there might be pancakes to celebrate an ending of fast for those who fasted, or those who gave something up. There might be an Easter egg hunt. There might be chocolate. You're allowed to eat chocolate bunnies. No one will be mad at you. We just like chocolate. We think Jesus is pro-chocolate, at least in the Lutherans. Others might be mad about that. And so that's kind of the whole span. So the thing is that some people, if you preach the full week on Palm and Passion Sunday, you read the whole Passion narrative. If you do your whole sermon, you still got like 5 more sermons in a row. And usually the person who comes to the Monday, Thursday service is going to come to Good Friday and Holy Saturday and the Sunday service. So you've got at least one person who's going to hear all 5 of them. So you got to kind of pace yourself as a pastor and try to leave enough mystery that people want to come to the thing that you spent months and months being stressed out and planning over, would be the way that pastors think about it. If you're not thinking about it like a pastor, then it's just lots of different nuanced ways of thinking about what's up during that season. There are some times that are dedicated to healing and health. There are other days that are dedicated to just sitting with the suffering and not commenting on it, because suffering is stupid and it doesn't need a commentary. But it's a mixed bag. And if you are someone who has some PTSD, violence in your past, check in with your pastor about which readings might or might not be unhelpful for your process during this time. The secret to know, though, is most people have seen the movies about Jesus dying or heard people talking about Jesus dying more than they've actually read the text themselves. The word blood is only mentioned in Matthew's gospel, right? So if your understanding of what happens to Jesus on the cross is based on something Mel Gibson said, or a Mel Gibson, like super crazy bloody movie. I couldn't even watch that movie because the trailers were too bloody for me. Know that the readings aren't as bloody. They're horrible, right? It's violence. If you've been hurt through whipping or through beating or childhood abuse, it might be too much for you. But the descriptions themselves are not Chainsaw Massacre level. Would be the way that I would describe it. Dan, what are your thoughts about these Good Friday texts?
Good
Friday, but the season in general.
Passion text. I had a very wise campus pastor tell me one time that she wished she could give out tickets on Ash Wednesday, Monday, Thursday, and Good Friday, so that only those people could come to Easter Sunday. And to me, there's something about that, because I think we the Christian church spends a lot of time in celebration, which is a good thing. I mean, we're an Easter people, I get that, but it means more when we go through some of that pain. It means more when we it feels like doing work, that we spend some time with it. I get the PTSD and the fact that it can be difficult for people sometimes. I understand that. So I on Palm Sunday, I kind of go back and forth. I think the celebration is sometimes overstated, and I'll come back to that in a second. It actually refers to a book I talked about last week. But because I think a big part of the celebration was actually sort of a political statement.
Sure.
But so I didn't the last 2 years. The last 2 times I preached or took care of a Palm Sunday service, last year I observed, and it was a reading of the Passion, and I actually kind of liked it, because the fact of the matter is a lot of people aren't going to come to our Monday, Thursday, Good Friday services. At least at my church, if I get 10 to 12 on Monday, Thursday, Good Friday, that would be great. And I'm not a huge church, so if on Sundays so Palm Sunday I'll have between 30 and 40 probably. I'll have 10 to 12 on Monday, Thursday, and Good Friday, and I'll have 80 on Easter, most of whom I don't know. Mm-hmm. So, it's nice to have that celebration of the resurrection, but to me, the resurrection loses a lot of its power and its poignancy without the stuff that comes before, without the Passion, without the observation of what happens on Monday, Thursday, and Good Friday. And a lot of churches, when I talk about churches, talking about denominations, have sort of done away with it. They don't do Ash Wednesday, they don't do Monday, Thursday, but they have this big Easter celebration, and like, it's not that Easter isn't important, it is, but you can't have a resurrection without a crucifixion, and that sort of bugs me in a way. I want people to sort of feel like this thing in their gut on Monday, Thursday, and Good Friday, because then Easter really means something, more personally to those people. But I've gone 2 different ways. This time I'm just reading. I'm doing the Passion. We're also doing a processional, a palm processional, before worship, or at the beginning of worship. But a very formative book for me was that I read during seminary was by Dominic Crossan, called The Last Week, and it talks about how the events of Palm Sunday and the events of that probably, I hate to use the word historically when I'm talking about anything like this, but that probably followed, were less what we've been told they were, and more about standing up to the political authority. So
I talked about that a little bit earlier before you got here about the processions. Yeah,
the 2 processions. Awesome. So that's, it's likely that and then the overturning of the tables in the temple was probably the next day or 2. Jesus was trying to get the attention of the authorities when they were their strongest in Jerusalem.
Yeah, and even if you don't see that in the text, even if you don't see political stuff happening, one of my favorite things that happens during this week is Jesus keeps telling his disciples to steal stuff from people. So, so even if you don't think that Jesus is trying to provoke people, he's just stopped caring about the law in general. Like, and the version that's in this year's reading, the Luke version, makes it really, really clear they didn't ask permission before they took the horse. So in some versions it's a horse, in some versions it's a donkey, in one version it's both a horse and a donkey, because there's an ancient text that says that the Messiah is going to come into Jerusalem, and the word that is used, some people translate horse, some people translate donkey, and the ones who couldn't decide which it was were like, well, just to make sure Jesus fulfills it, he's going to ride both a horse and a donkey at the same time. Which I like to imagine like someone entering the circus when they ride two horses, one leg on each side.
Yeah, 1 foot on each. Yeah, exactly.
That's not what Jesus did, but it's funny in my mind. So Jesus, regardless of whether or not he's politically pissing everyone off, which clearly he is, he's stopped caring about human laws at this point, would be my way to say it.
Yeah.
And he's wildly swinging outside of acceptable social order. Like he says, go follow that guy who's carrying water on his head. That's where we're going to celebrate the Passover, and only women were allowed to be water carriers. So it would be the equivalent of saying, go find the town drag queen.
Yeah.
We are going to have Passover at their house, because if it was a common thing for men to have water on their heads, how would they all end up at the same place later? Like, you would have to know it was the weirdo's house, or there wouldn't just be one house where all 12 of the disciples ended up at. And so everyone in town would have known about the girly boy who carried water on his head. And I say that as a sign of honor, not as a put down name. Right. And so Jesus is flaunting law and order. He's flaunting social order, and he's flaunting political order all at the same time. And so,
and he had flashes of that throughout his ministry, but it's all much more pronounced at this point.
Right. It's a good time. Yeah.
But I that's another side of Jesus. I don't think that I think we have this nice Jesus who just loved everybody, and we don't realize that what he did was, especially during this week, we acknowledge the sort of revolutionary nature of it. I've actually said, in some ways, I think Jesus was this might be the Lutheran in me trying to make a connection between Luther and Jesus, but in a lot of ways, Jesus was a reformer. And what I mean by that is, Jesus wasn't trying to create Christianity. He was saying, okay, look, Judaism, if you look at him purely as a man, he was looking at Judaism and the history of Judaism and saying, a lot of these laws don't pertain anymore. What's really important now is that we love each other and we love God, and we need to change the way we're doing things. You can look at it almost like he didn't have a 95 thesis that he nailed to a wall, but he had
the 95 thesis nailed to a cross.
Exactly. He had a two thesis: love the Lord your God and love each other. Period. And that's the law, and we're not doing it. Jesus said we're not doing this well right now, and we need to do better. So in some ways, I think of him as a reformer and revolutionary, totally aside from being the Son of God, and that comes out a lot this week, which is interesting to me. But we like the lovey-dovey Jesus,
I don't trust lovey-dovey Jesus. I think he's creepy.
Well, yeah, but churches promote that lovey-dovey side of Jesus.
I like that God is love, and then I like my Jesus a little bit gritty. But that's in part context too, right? So the difference part of the reason that Dan can lean into the gritty, gruesome, somber parts of this service is that some of the contextual reasons that I can't lean into those things. Right here at our congregation, it feels sometimes like at worship services, if someone breathes the wrong way, everyone's going to die, right? Because we just have an older congregation with some pretty precarious health stuff going on. We have people who worry about how their money's going to last in their retirement. We have people who worry about whether someone's going to leave the gas on in the church and the whole thing's going to burn down and then our church will have to close, right? So we're so advanced at worrying. We are like the super geniuses of worrying and anxiety that we don't need to go deep into the cross. We live there. That's our context. And it's palpable. It's so palpable. I don't write sermons in part because particularly at my beautiful congregation, something happens a lot right before the sermon that if you had a written sermon, it would not work well. Once I had someone lead the Nicene Creed when it was time for me to preach. And so I preached about all the times people in the Bible were confused. This week, right after the gospel acclamation, right, you sing glory and praise to you, O Lord and Jesus Christ. And I read the gospel text, and then someone started saying very loudly their complaints about life, right? Yeah, my people heckle me, and I call it heckling because it is actual heckling, not participation. And so, and they would know, they know this. And so instead of preaching the sermon I was going to preach, I said, okay, let's get it all out. What's everything we're mad about? What's everything we're grumpy about? Like, let's take the time and say it all out loud. They didn't want to, right? Because I was naming it and they knew they were being called out. But some people participated. And we named some of the stuff that made us really grumpy and we were pissed off about. And then we just talked about the history of no Christian ever being happy ever with anything. Like, the whole story of the Bible is everyone being pissed off that they never get what they want, right? From Moses's people are freed from slavery and they're pissed off about the food and the content. They don't think their worship is pretty enough. They want gold, and right. So, and they're gossipy. There's no part of the Bible that isn't gossipy. And so then I just talked about the reading for the week, which was Lazarus. And maybe I imagined that Lazarus' sisters, because Lazarus in this story for last week had been raised from the dead after he had been dead a while, which means he probably was smelly. And so I imagined that Mary was passive aggressive. She was really grumpy that her brother was so smelly and that she had to live with him, that the massive amount of perfume was not about anointing Jesus. It was the excuse of a visitor and the obligation of hospitality, which meant she could go over the top and waft, right? The fragrance was so wafty in the house that it overwhelmed everyone, right? And so she fixed the thing that had been bugging her about her brother's smell by being over the top nice to Jesus, right? And that maybe is more accurate than knowing that Jesus was going to die and anoint his body for death, right? That's the beautiful mystical story. But it fit the context of my congregation to talk about passive aggressiveness.
Yeah.
And so there are ways in which these stories can have new life and meaning based on the context in which we preach them, the communities that gather, the new spin maybe on what the pastor notices in the text based on how they're heckled at any particular moment. And I would say too, Dan, if a child of the congregation died, I bet you'd throw away every single one of your sermons. Yep. And you would not go deep into the death anymore. Yep. Right? Well, you'd talk about the mourning, or
for me, preaching is a conversation between me and the congregation, and so that's why I've never been a supply preacher, and I'm not sure that I would be a very good one, because it helps to sort of know the people that you're having this conversation with, and so. My context, every context is different. My context, my church is probably at least 50% grew up not in church. And they only kind of know the happy-go-lucky, loving Jesus, and not sort of the tough story that goes with it. So in my church, it's about getting an education half the time. It's my church is like even stories in the Passion they haven't heard, they don't know. So a lot of them. So it's I regularly have people that are regular attenders go, oh, I didn't know that was in the Bible, with pretty even what I would think fairly common stories. So it is a different context. I think you do have to be careful. Yeah, I mean, you're never going to make everybody happy.
Understatement of a pastor slogan that are true. So obviously, did it do? There you go.
Thanks. Every time I preach, there's at least one wrinkled nose in the congregation and one joyous smile that that I can tell. Okay, that it hit home with that person, but not with that person. And that's where the Passion story can be. The more the tougher the message is, the more likely you're going to have people that are on those extremes. My sermon last week was one of my worst ever, I think. It just didn't. I usually know when I sit down and I am sort of touched by my own sermon, that I think that. It had to, if it moved me, and I knew it already, it had to move somebody else. And the week before, I had one of my better sermons on the prodigal son, and I had that extreme. I had people that were like, well, I disagree with you on this and this and this, and other people said, oh, that was fantastic. So it's interesting that well, first of all, I love that they're honest about it, because a lot of congregations, everyone will tell you a great sermon even if they thought it sucked. So. That's I'd rather have honest people, but it makes this week interesting because all of these topics, not counting Easter, Easter is
it's his own ball of wax.
It's his own thing. Palm Sunday, Fun Thursday, and Good Friday. If they don't sort of either if they don't evoke an emotional response in you, then you didn't pay attention.
Yeah.
Really, Easter is a celebration, but I don't want to call it empty, like the empty tomb, but it's sort of it's already sort of preached for you. I mean, you can read the gospel and go, okay, done. What? There's nothing to explain. There's nothing there's not a lot of depth there. I mean, you can always find, pastors are good at finding something, right? But there's a lot more meat on the bone during Holy Week.
Well, so for this Sunday, I've been planning to have just an overwhelming number of hearts in our sanctuary for Easter, but after my grumpy heckling this week, I decided we were going to put hearts everywhere starting now, all through the Palm Passion reading, if only so that people who are wondering, I wonder if that church is one of those scary, gross churches, then the answer would be a million heart window. These are heart window clings made with glue and food coloring. And so we'll have anybody who comes to church at Grace is going to get a window cling if they want a window cling. Probably no one's going to want my window clings, but they're going to overwhelm our window. Yeah. Pastor Dan wants a window cling. Puffy paint.
Just mail them to me.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll happen.
Yeah. If someone asked you to mail you something this week, what would you say?
Okay, point taken. Gotcha.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of a crazy time because if I remember the number of services that I talked about, we're also doing a Seder on Wednesday. So we're doing a Wednesday Seder, a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday next week. So that's 5 bulletins for next week and 1 for this week. So that's 6 bulletins in 2 weeks. So
I'm not doing I really want to do a Saturday, an Easter Saturday, but I'm just not sure it can get enough traction this year, and I'm not doing a Seder. But I spent even this week, literally this week on Monday, someone said, well, how do you spend your time? I said, it's a really busy week. And they said, how do you spend your time? I mean, it's not that complicated. And I said, well, in my particular context, I don't really have office staff. So Monday and Tuesday, I spent 8 hours making printing our Easter bulletin, and I've started to fold and staple them. 8 hours just on administrative stuff, let alone all the other stuff that I do. Again, it's context, especially this time of year. I mean, to me, this time of year is the busiest time of year, and Advent's a close second. But
yeah, and my favorite thing, my favorite Easter tradition. This is going to be the weirdest Easter tradition ever, but I always, this was my favorite. Is so at my grandmother's home congregation, which is where we went for all of our big services, they had a million services, right? They had all these services, and they had a midnight service on Saturday, and then they had a sunrise service at 6 a.m. the next morning, and then the regular 10 o'clock service. My favorite Easter tradition was at the sunrise service. My grandmother would sit at the table with the pastor during the sunrise service coffee hour and pretend to talk to them while they took a nap. And so they would sit like this, and then she would just look like she's like emotional and really needs someone to talk to so that no one interrupts. But really what she would be doing is letting the pastor take a nap, because she felt so sad for the pastor that they had to do like a
midnight and oh man.
So so I'm gonna post down here. Living Lutheran posted something about how to like not stress out your pastor even more during this time. Yeah. I know we're supposed to be doing Bible study instead of just venting, but what do you want from us people?
It's a good week. It's a good week to vent.
It's a good week. Get it all out. Nail it to the cross.
Right.
Into some flowers. Eat some pancakes. It's such a weird thing, because you like, the thing that pastors know in small congregations that they'd like to grow bigger is that you might get a bunch of visitors on Easter, and you really want to do everything amazing to capture them and to help them stay and to think you're great and to try you out again. And you might get some people out of it. But it's a lot of work to feel like the next time I'm going to have this opportunity is Christmas. So I sit with vitamin C's at my desk, and I just take, anytime I feel stressed out, I take some more. I know that you can overload on vitamin C and it flushes them out of your system, but they're gummies and they taste good. And I haven't gotten sick yet, so that's good.
Awesome. I was at church last night at about 9 o'clock trying to finish some things up, and I had a kid who's coming to our church because it's a place that they can practice their violin, and I said, I usually wander into church around between 9 and 10 most days. It's like, oh wow, it's nice to have a short day, and my administrator who was there said, he's here 4 or 5 nights a week, like late. So, and like, it's just, especially this time of year, there's just so much to do. But it's funny. Obviously it's something we signed up for, but more than that, we have, ironic, use the word passion, but we have a passion for, and a calling to spread the gospel. And this week is such a crucial week in the life of that part of our calling. Yeah. So I'm not complaining. I mean, I people say, oh man,
I'm complaining.
Did you really work 60 hours a week? I'm like, yeah, I work 60 hours this week.
I think I worked 80 hours this week.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think it was 84. I think I did the math.
Woo!
Yeah.
That's crazy. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But it's about such an important week that to me I couldn't think of doing anything different. Yeah.
There's one thing I wanted to point out in the Philippians text, just because I thought it was neat and I hadn't remembered it being said before. There's a line that says, kind of, though Jesus was in the form of God, he did not equate equality with God as something to be exploited, but emptied himself. And I just thought that was a great line to lift up, particularly in these times with all of the presidential rhetoric that's happening and all the other kinds of negativity that happens in the world, like the income inequality, this idea that someone who really was better than us, like for real better, not just like Kim Kardashian better, that someone who really was better than us didn't hold it over us or lord it over us or use that as a way to take advantage of us. And I think so often, like I've gone to like Chichen Itza, the pyramids in Mexico were designed to use math to trick people who weren't smart about math and astronomy to believe that they had the power to talk to God. And so every year when a certain planet was above the sky, it meant the rainy season was going to happen again. And so the shaman of the town would tell people to come and talk to him as soon as he started seeing that planet in the sky that led him to know that the rainy season was going to come soon. And they would come and give him money to make rain happen. And he would look up in the sky and he would say, it's soon, it will rain and I will make it happen. And it was a part of just the natural cycle of that place, but he knew astrology. So he knew math and he knew how to know when to predict that the rain was coming. But he exploited that to take advantage of people and to take their money as a way to kind of lord it over them. And I think about the ways that, like, there's a whole category of people who have books that are about getting rich quick, and the whole book is about how great they are because you bought their book. And that if you just think positively or in the right way, that you can do that too. And there are some people who use the Bible in that same sort of way, that if you pray hard enough, you'll get everything you want. Or if you give me all your money for my new pastor airplane, then you will have so much abundance in your life. And sometimes it is true that when we give, we receive. And sometimes it's true that those communities stick to their commitments. I was listening to a story on NPR yesterday about a 25-year-old insurance company that is just Christian communities, people who pay in, and whenever someone in the community gets sick, they all pay for the illness together. And they've, at least in their own reporting on the radio, said they've never had something that they couldn't pay for, like leukemia or something like that. And it might be that people have this in addition to their own insurance rather than just as a complete alternate. But so there are communities that are living up to those things and not just entirely taking advantage of people. But how cool is it to celebrate that someone who was equal with God didn't remind us of it over and over and over and over and over again, and didn't say, I'm so great, come feed me grapes, right? Like you imagine in old-timey movies about people being fanned and, right? Having grapes put in their mouth. Right. I mean, I kind of wish he would have stuck with the Messiah stuff that was in the imagination of the ancient Hebrews, the stuff about feeding everyone who was hungry and making sure that disease didn't come, or just getting rid of the F word in our current life of cancer. So I wish Jesus would have brought the justice a little bit more. This whole waiting for justice in the future, I think, is BS. But that's pretty amazing. I don't know. I don't know. I have moments when I'm able to try to replicate that same humility without self-deprecation, but other moments where I just feel like it would be so much easier to put people in their place and just be like, well, do you know that I have a community of faith behind me? You can't treat me this way. And I don't go there, but sometimes I think it. So.
Well, I think my favorite points in some of the favorite points in gospel are when Jesus is undeniably human. You know, when he's napping on the boat and they're like, wake up, and he's like, oh, gosh, I was sleeping.
Yeah.
You morons. It's there. He goes through. We see in the Gospels, and I love that we have to remember that this isn't, that the Gospels are were written down by someone else, so it's kind of it's supposed to be sort of self-promoting. So when Jesus gets a little grumpy, or when he doubts in the Garden of Gethsemane, or when I often go, oh, why did the gospel writer write that down? Because that doesn't necessarily promote Christianity, but it does promote that Jesus was human also, and that Jesus was capable of all that stuff, and didn't lord, his divinity over anyone. So I love those moments a lot.
Although he did throw himself a parade.
Well, yeah.
That's the part that I think is the funniest, is like, Jesus was so humble. I'm like, yeah, except for the time he threw himself a parade.
But it goes back. What was the purpose?
I've never, ever said, go get me a horse.
No?
I'm making an entrance, right? Like, I've made entrances before, but I've never done it on a horse.
Well, there's always a first time.
There is always a first time. And the day I ride a horse into this church should be the day I go on vacation.
For a long time.
Because horse poo and carpet is a bad idea.
Yeah, probably.
It's a good idea till you remember that the animals poop.
Yeah. Everybody poops.
Everybody poops. I can't. That's why it would be even worse with both a horse and a donkey. It's not like you tie them together. I mean, unless Jesus entered like Laura Ingalls Wilder style with the horse and the donkey pulling a cart or something. It just doesn't make no sense.
No, you're right.
Maybe he had just a really wide seat. Maybe Jesus was bigger and fatter than we have in the pictures, and that's why he needed both a horse and a donkey.
I like the idea of like a covered wagon though.
Ding. Yeah. Covered wagons are slow moving.
Well, it was they had that, they had to have time to put their cloaks down in the street, and you had to wave the palm.
I know. I kind of feel like it was kind of a disappointment. Like, it sounds like it was a great parade, right? But you'd have to time it really well not to look stupid. Because imagine you're like sitting, like, so I'm standing at the entrance. I'm standing at the entrance of the city, right? Hey, somebody give me a horse. I want to make an entrance. And then I wait and I wait and I wait and I wait. Okay, I get my horse. Could you arrange like some coats? I'll wait. All right. Now wave something, so like confetti. Someone make confetti. And it's not like they could just like pick up, if it was a lot of people, like the text implies, it's not like there's just a million palm leaves lying on the ground. Someone has to climb the palm trees
and cut them,
cut down the leaves. And Jesus is sitting at the gate being like, I'll wait, don't worry. Like,
well, so not to go back to the other story.
None of those things could happen spontaneously.
Was the other parade compulsory? Like, did people, when the Roman governor came into town, were people, sort of forced to go? And what did they do for that parade? Did they have palm branches there? Did they,
yeah, so they might have had them already, because there would have been an announcement a couple of days before the political leader came, right? So they could have had them and just been going to a different parade. But,
right.
If you wanted to see the cool guy in town and you really wanted the bonus points for sucking up, like, even if you're going to just like the Podunk 4th of July parade in some town, you got to sit out there and hold your court. You got to get your lawn chair out there at the right time, or you're not going to see anyone and they're not going to see you. So I don't imagine that if it was a simultaneous double backdoor entry, right? If people were on their way to go see, like, it was not the people trying to suck up to the political ruler who still would have been straggling, hanging out with their palm leaves, right?
Right.
It would have been the people who were like, I don't want to go to this parade. What a stupid, so it would have been the people who maybe wanted something ulterior to happen.
Well, you
got tweets about it.
I imagine that Jesus parade was actually probably less attended than the other parade.
Well, sure.
But the other thing I keep thinking is, have you ever been invited to, you already have plans for something that maybe you don't really want to do, but you
Right.
kind of have to do, and then you get invited to do something really cool, and you're like, oh,
What's the last cool thing you've been invited to, Dan?
I don't get it. I have no social life. I don't get invited to cool things. It's not about me.
It's about Jesus.
No, you got invited to to sit in the grandstand for when the governor comes into town and someone says, "Oh, but wouldn't you like to come see this Jesus guy?" And you're like,
So
"Yeah."
Here's what this reminds me of. There is a story that maybe is not true, but it was published in a gay paper by a pastor who was maybe off his rocker and maybe wasn't. And so there was this pastor named Ray Broshears, and he wasn't authorized. He didn't have background checks. He didn't have to do 7 years of school in the way that like Dan and I did.
Yeah.
Ray Broshears was a part of the Universal Life Church. Yes, way back in the 60s, the Universal Life Church existed. You had to take a test back then. And so he was a pastor, and he was a gay man, and he was kind of radical. He founded something called the Lavender Panthers, and they were in Rolling Stone magazine. And it was a group of like drag queens and gay men who, when people would come out and beat up gay people, they would say that they would beat them up, but there's no known instances of them actually doing it. But there are some really awesome photos of them in Rolling Stone, like full on drag queens holding rifles.
Wow.
And chains, like to go beat people up, but there's no known history that they actually do that. So Ray Brashears, the Pride Parade in most cities is the 1 year anniversary remembering of the Stonewall riots that happened in New York. And so Ray Brashears and a couple of other people were a part of the very first Pride Parade. They decided to do this march down Market Street in San Francisco. Well, and then everyone kind of discovered that working with Ray wasn't very much fun. Like, because he was annoying and he said things. I mean, he was posing with rifles with his clergy collar in Rolling Stone saying they were going to beat up people who beat up gay people. So you can imagine he's hard to put your name next to on something. And so they kick him off the committee of the parade he founded. And but in his version of the story, he quit because he was mad. Because at the time, gay rights was called the homophile movement, and they were trying to be respectable and to get out of all of the crazy stereotypes that people had about them. So when they would protest and march, they would wear full suits and they would wear dresses. And so they were trying to look like just your average secretary. And the idea was to demystify gay people and to not look like ruffians, right? So the second year of the Gay Pride Parade in San Francisco, they made a rule that everyone had to march in suits if you were men and in a dress if you were a woman. If you've ever been to the San Francisco Pride Parade, you know that dress code is not adhered to. Wearing clothes at all is really not something that happens. The suits and ties would be on the women and the dresses would be on the men. And so, but for the second year of the Pride Parade, the story goes that Ray Brashears led a separate march full of the like gender queer folk and the drag queens, and they marched in the opposite direction of the parade. And the intention was to like mix through, but they did it one street over and then they walked in opposite directions. So this would be the equivalent of walking in opposite directions, but Jesus would be the drag queens with the rifles and the chains.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right. So that's kind of the equivalent story that I think is fun and kind of like this.
That's great.
I think my people might like it just because we like San Francisco history a lot here in San Francisco. There's no evidence that that's a true story, but it is in print. So told by Ray. Ray told the story.
Well, if it's in print, it must be true exactly as it was written.
It has to be true. So super true. Yeah. Well, everyone, I hope that you have a lovely Holy Week. Next week, I imagine we're all going to be so exhausted that we're all going to find excuses not to do Bible study, but maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe we'll do it, or maybe I'll do it. It's hard to know. If we see you, yay. If we don't, thanks for checking in all the time, and have a happy Holy Week. Have a great Easter, and we'll see you the next time we're up here.
Yep. See you later.
Bye.